Dr. Tulipana, thanks for joining me on the podcast today. And I want to jump right in because you're the CEO of the Cancer Treatment Centers of America, but almost as interesting, or maybe more interesting, more passionate for you is I know you love your wife and your 8 children. So let's start there. 8 children. It's 2022, and you got 8 children. Talk to us about that.
And my wife had every one of them at different times, no twins. There's like 2 questions people always ask. Are there any multiples? And is that from the same family, or is that a blended family? And I'm like, no, that's from my wonderful wife, Kara, and she bore each and every one of them individually. It's a great question. I met my wife close to 30 years ago. I was an undergraduate studying biology. Minor in music, loved music. Vocal performance was my real passion. I don't think I ever told you this, but I wanted to go down that route. But I realized that, if you ever wanted to be successful and have a family and do good things in life and do medicine, you can't really have a major in vocal performance. I'm sure there are some, but anyway. So I met my wife because she was working on her first master's degree in vocal performance, and I got one in education. Anyway, I'm meandering. When we married, I was still very young. I actually hadn't even finished college yet. It was before my senior year. She was a graduate student, and when you're convicted and you recognize that there's someone that you think you're going to spend the rest of your life with, or you're going to make that commitment to, why not jump in? That's always been the way I operate. The children, though, not always the case. We thought we'd have, the 2.1 kids that everyone has, right? We had a boy first between my first year and second year of medical school. And Landon, he's, now 26 almost, and a great young man. Then we have my daughter between my first year and second year of residency. So 3 years later, or 4 years later. And, I thought, we got a boy and a girl. They're spread apart. This is perfect. Then my dad was diagnosed with cancer, pancreatic cancer. And we really felt like, having 2 kids only is probably not what we're called to do. And so we thought, we'll have a third. So we had our third, who's named after my dad, George. It was then that my wife started her conversion, her true conversion to the Catholic faith. She grew up Protestant. We got married in the Catholic Church. She converted to Catholicism before we got married, out of obligation to me, because I thought we should be of one faith. God bless her, but she had some issues with it. But then she went through this just dramatic conversion. And one day, she hands me this CD. I think it's I can't think of her name that did it, Janet, whatever. Sorry about that. But anyway, it was about accepting the gifts that are given to you, right? And one of them is accepting that gift of life, of having children. And she thought that I would just go off the deep end and be like, absolutely not. We're not going to do this. This is something we should control, because I controlled everything at that point, right? And so I listened to it, and I'm like, I go back in that day, and I came back and I said, honey, that actually makes sense. So yeah, I'm on board if you are. Let's see what happens. And so we just figured that, if we were healthy, we were young, we were relatively successful, had the means. And even if we didn't, we felt like, we had no real reason to not accept whatever comes our way as far as children. And lo and behold, like every 15 or 12 to 15 months, my wife was pregnant for the next, 6 years. And so that's how that happened. So we do explicitly know how it happened. And we're very successful at that too. So we have 8 beautiful kids, 20, almost 26 down to 7. So.
Wow. That's fantastic. And clearly it is a blessing to you and to Kara to be able to do that. And to, I think that's an interesting leadership lesson too, to surrender for a lot of us, excuse me, this desire to feel like we have control over everything. It reminds me, I just saw a great quote yesterday from Thomas Sowell, and he says some of the biggest cases of mistaken identity are among intellectuals who have trouble remembering that they are not God. Yeah. That we think we have so much more control over things than we do. And sometimes just letting go and letting life sort of bring what it brings, I think are part of the keys to the kingdom. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we have to properly discern, of course, and think of what our motives are. And that's something I try to reflect on in my leadership all the time, is what is my true motive here for whatever it is, a decision at work, or hiring, or even firing someone, or making a change. Is this a pure motive? Is it going to help more than just myself? Is it going to bring more gifts to the table? And so, but I do think you do have to surrender sometimes, because of many times, as not only leadership in your life, as a father, as a friend, a colleague, whatever. I mean, you make choices that sometimes are not for your personal benefit, and may actually harm your ability to succeed in the world. And so, I mean, I've made many of those that I could, you think back on it, if I had, my wife and I had two children, and just continued down my path to being a physician and a leader, and financially, I'd be in a much different place than I am right now. And, successfully and everything else, it'd be a different world, right? I'd be free at that point, if you will. Free at this point, both kids would be out of the house, and I could golf every day if I wanted to, but that's not where we are. And so, but I have that new gift, like we were sharing earlier. Instead of that, I last afternoon, a couple of days ago in the afternoon, didn't have big meetings in the afternoon, so I grabbed my 7-year-old and went and played 9 holes. I mean, what better thing is there than that, right?
Yes.
So
Yeah, that's the substance of life, right? And I think, as particularly in our American culture, we're so much in a hurry to get to the future. It's this whole idea of like, well, life will start once I get my degree, or life will start once I become a resident, or life will start when I'm a full, in your case, doctor maybe, or life will start, after the kids are through high school and into college, and we keep living for this, in many ways, fictitious future, as opposed to just saying, look what I've got right here, right now. Look at this. I'm playing golf with my 7-year-old. It doesn't get any better than that.
And that's, as we're just having this discussion, it kind of makes me think of, we had the honor the other day at Cancer Treatment Centers of America here in Phoenix, of doing our Celebrate Life event, where we invite those who have survived their cancer for at least 5 years back for a celebration. It's the first time we've done it in a couple of years because of the COVID. The in-person stuff was kind of difficult to do, of course. In inviting all those people back, and I've shared this with people, and sometimes people recoil at it, but in oncology and in cancer, sometimes when you're given that diagnosis of cancer, it can be, again, a gift. And I look at things as gifts, right? Because if you look at it properly, and you look at your life and understand your mortality from the time you're born, it gives you kind of a reset moment and an opportunity to say, what, yes, more cancers are mortality rates are going down significantly, and we can treat and we can fight this. It may give you a motive to fight something, but at the same time, it also gives individuals a time to kind of reframe and say, wow, how have I lived my life? And now maybe at least embrace their mortality a little more, and make those relationships that they've passed up on. So, yeah. Anyway, that was a tangent, but
No, not at all. Not at all. It's actually a great leadership lesson in there. That to be able to accept things as they are. Too often, I think, again, we curse gravity in as if it shouldn't exist. When really it is what it is. Whatever the situation is, how do we, as leaders, accept it and then, to your point earlier, make conscious choices? How do we stop and slow down and make conscious choices that move us forward?
yeah.
How do you think about, leadership and what it takes to be an effective leader these days?
Yeah, there's so much out there, right? I mean, personally, I think it takes a level of humility that many don't have. I hate to say that. Oh no, I hate to say that. I think it really does take a level of humility. I have to ask myself all the time, am I being humble in this, in the way I'm leading right now? And I say that because if you're the leader because you're trying to put yourself on a pedestal, I think you're destined to fail at it, because it will become about you as an individual rather than the group or the community, the people that you're leading, And so I think that's one piece that's extraordinarily important this day that many people forget, because it's all about how you appear on, your social media, or on your recent webcast with all your stakeholders or your employees and things. And so yes, there has to be a level of confidence and knowledge and intellect to lead an organization appropriately, but at the same time there does have to be a level of humility, because as you know, if you're leading 500, 600,000, 2,000 people, there's probably a lot of people in there that are a lot brighter than you are, and and at least in their area understand things more intimately than you do. Yet as the leader of it, you're still faced with that responsibility of making the right decisions. So I think good leaders also need to listen probably more than they talk. And I'm not exhibiting that right now in this discussion, but but I mean, you really do. You have to listen, and not only listen with your ears, but also listen with your eyes and notice people's behaviors. And it's one area I think has kind of fallen behind in this era of COVID and constant Zoom, is that it's hard to read people or have true conversation. And then, also be willing to have true conversation. Growing up I had 3 brothers, pretty large family, not for the time, not like mine, but, and an Italian father and a Polish mother. And, they were full of passion and argued. And I think good leaders have to know how to argue without insulting people too. So I learned that from my parents. They may have thrown things at each other every now and then, but I never heard them insult each other. So.
Yeah, that's great. Well, you are talking more than you're listening, but that's by design, Kevin. This is a podcast where we're intentionally wanting you to talk and share your thoughts and insights, so you can let go of any concern there. You don't strike me as someone who's likes to hear themselves talk. So we love your wisdom here. So if you think about this humility concept, I heard an interesting Hebrew root on this, that it comes from sort of this idea that it's taking up our given space. Now, for many of us, that may be our God-given space on earth, and it's no more or no less than that. Too often we think it's about taking up less space, but really it's about taking up whatever space is appropriate for you, and no more than that or no less than that. And I think a lot of leaders, frankly, even the ones, I was like this when I was a young leader. Humility was so important to me that I talked about it a lot. And I realized, well, that's kind of interesting that really I want attention on how humble I am. And I realized there's an oxymoron, and maybe I wasn't as humble as I thought I was. I think I've grown, a decent amount in the last 15 years. But I think people still really struggle with this one, because it is such a hard concept to get, and a hard one to live. So how do you check yourself, I guess, when it comes to being the humble leader that you want to be?
Yeah, again, I think it goes back to really checking on motives. What is my motive in whatever it is, if it's gathering a meeting or just presenting something, or myself, or whatever it is, what is the motive in this? And if it really is to kind of put oneself as a leader in front of everyone, say, here I am, I'm the big guy making the decisions, then it's it's probably not right. Not that most leaders do that, but there are some. I mean, I've you've experienced them. Some folks that really like to put themselves in the spotlight and make sure that everyone hears what they're saying, and that's great. I will say, personally, at times it becomes difficult because, again, having as many children as I do, and having to be the paternal person when I'm home, at times I will step in that sometimes, and if I feel challenged, I'll fall back into my fatherly directive, and that's probably not so humble because a lot of adults don't take it so well when you get too paternalistic in that leadership. So I think it's one thing I often will kind of check on myself too, and I make mistakes, of course, everyone does, and when I do, I think one of the first things you should do is call it out on yourself in front of the individual, not in a group. Oh, sorry, I made that mistake. But it's been interesting though, when I've done that, I've apologized for either being a little too assertive or making a decision too quickly that didn't consider everyone, to individuals, and I've had some leaders, particularly my physician colleagues, at times correct correct me for that. Like, you don't have to apologize. You shouldn't apologize. You should never apologize. It shows weakness. And I'm like, come on, you want people to know that we're human, right? So.
Yeah, which is often missing. That's that old school mindset, I think, frankly, of like, never apologize, never show a weakness, which implies that it's weak to apologize, which I don't personally get. It takes more strength, it takes more courage to do than it does to be an ignoramus and stick your head in the sand. But
Yeah,
I don't know. What do you think about that?
No, absolutely. I mean, how easy is it to kind of like ignore your own faults and just kind of overlook them as if, oh, well, it kind of goes back to, if you accept everything that comes, some would say, well, if you accept everything that comes your way, then if you make a mistake, you should just kind of move on and not acknowledge it. I'm like, no, I mean, there's sometimes to make the wrong decisions or behave the wrong way, or, let my, my anger get a hold of me or whatever it is. And so you're exactly right. I think, as long as you're not constantly apologizing for, missteps and things that you have to succeed at, say as the CEO, if your P&L is off, yeah, you should take the blame for it, or at least it lands on your shoulders. But at the same time, you can't be like, well, I'm just sorry I overlooked that. You gotta have a good reason for it. But at the same time, if there's, an interaction with a colleague or a disciplinary thing you've got to do, or a certain direction you take, and it doesn't go quite right, if you were the leader that made that decision, I think it's perfectly fine to say, wow, I really looked at that the wrong way, and next time I'm going to ask for some additional opinion and listen a little more.
So give us an example of that.
Yeah, I think, if I look back at so my trajectory in this organization as a leader, I've taken several steps to it. And one of them, I was a regional chief medical officer for our operations in Oklahoma and Arizona. And then was also giving some direction on how to manage a particular program across the enterprise. And at the time we had 5 hospitals. And I had just assumed that the way that I had experienced a certain program being run in one hospital could easily be, spread across all of them. And it probably could. Operationally, it would make sense, right? And maybe got some efficiencies out of it. But at the same time, it didn't really consider the history or the program that had been built at a couple of the hospitals. And I really just kind of pushed forward on it and railroaded it. And it honestly, it caused some disruption. Again, I was doing it under the direction of some other people, but it did cause some disruption, and really, some of the meetings were contentious, and I, would respond in a kind of a way, that this is the way it's got to be done. And, although it was probably right from a financial standpoint, it really didn't consider, the personal relationships that people had built and the longstanding trust that they had in it. And so, I very openly to the leaders of that particular program that did come in and apologized for it. And that's actually when I got the correction or the direction from one of their physician leaders, was like, well, you should never apologize. Don't apologize for it. Just make the right decision. And I'm like, well, we're going to make wrong decisions at times, and you have to accept at least that you played a part in it and you were at fault for it, rather than just accepting that wrong decision and saying, okay, well, that's fine. I made that decision and I had that authority. So anyway, I think that's probably one example of it. And to this day, I still will do that. I at least try to be cognizant of how it affects people, any of those decisions. And then if it does, maybe get ahead of it. If there's going to be a disruption to relationships and stuff, bring that to the forefront first, at least allowing people to be aware of where those changes are going to be. So it may not be as concrete as an example of it, but it's one that I reflect on sometimes, because I look at it in my management, maybe it wasn't the shining moment of my young career. So
yeah. Well, and it's one example of many. It sounds like it's part of your sort of operating premise, Kevin, is you don't want to be above being human, and we all make mistakes, whether it's at work or at home. I've been trying to work on that for the last couple of years, of going to my children and saying, hey, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say what I said, or whatever the case may be. It just happened yesterday with my youngest, who's also 7, by the way. and I was frustrated. And so I walked away. And so I came back to her like 2 minutes later. I was like, all right, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have walked away. Let's talk about this. And it opened up the conversation. It took more energy and courage, I think, from me to do that than to just sort of brood in my own, I'm right, and this little 7-year-old's wrong, which is what we want to do as humans.
That's right. I think you're exactly right. That moment when you can like walk back, and it's a great demonstration, not only for our 7-year-old children, but our 27-year-old, executive that works with you, that when you respond the wrong way, you go back and say, yeah, it's a coaching moment, right? And it's not only for that individual, but it's also for yourself, because, and that's really how I think we all should live, is that, if we're going to give direction to someone else, we darn well better be willing to take that direction for our own behavior too.
Yeah. Well, that's a great lead into a fun topic, which is coaching. Part of when we work with clients, we're always helping them to make distinctions between, leadership, coaching, and management. Those are 3 very, very different skills and tools. We tend to mix them all together as if they're one thing in our society, and by creating distinctions there, it's really helpful. And around coaching, one of the keys is that coaching is only coaching if it's asked for. That you too often we want to go to somebody and say, are you open to feedback? And then whether they say yes or no, we give it to them. And that's rude and destructive of relationships. That you're as a leader, you have to get people to be open to it. So I'm wondering how do you go about in creating a coaching culture within your organization? How do you get to I know you're probably not perfect at this, but how do you think about yourself and others being open to each other's input?
Yeah, Tom, you're giving me direction right now as I reflect on just interactions, and the difference there. That is, I think I just intuited that through time, that you people have to be receptive. And maybe I actually, now that you say this, I'm thinking about it. I'd say my wife has helped me more than anyone else in this, as I'm sure you've experienced before.
Oh yeah.
Your wife is much more likely to say to you, hey, I didn't ask for your opinion on that. And so, it is different. You're right. I think, leadership obviously is yes, it's different. And sometimes you do have to give that direction. It's not as much a personal thing. And there's that difference between the coaching and being a leader. And that's, I haven't always been the best person at that, but I've recognized it in others, and have distinctly said to people, to some folks who've come and thought they'd like that other gentleman. There's been other examples that came and tried to give me direction or coaching, they thought, to make me a better whatever it was. And it's like, that wasn't the moment for it, right? Help me help me understand maybe where I made or could have made a better decision through example or direction, rather than coming at it from a personal thing. Coaching often feels much more personal, right? Mm-hmm. Because you're trying to form that person and turn them into something different, whether it's their leadership style or their management style, or just even their personality. Whereas leadership is more demonstrable. So, I want people to, hopefully I'm being a good example, and they will follow the way I interact with my colleagues, the people that report to me, or my superiors, and get that direction, rather than having to go back and try to transform them as an individual. Because you're right, people are not going to be receptive to it unless they ask for it or they're open for it to begin with. So yeah, I'm going to have to reflect on that a little more, but it's great.
Yeah, it's coaching actually happens in the listening, which is, sounds a little bit woo-woo, but it is true that, some people are infinitely coachable. They can take any input, whether it's direct or harsh or even cutting, and they can reflect on it and say, well, that's interesting. I wonder what the person was trying to say. But for others, they can't listen to anything, that it becomes almost like a personal attack. And so it really does happen in the listening. And I think in a way, part of your answer there was, I just try to live it. I just try to be coachable. And if I can be an example of it, then maybe my people will follow me, which I think is absolutely the best way to bring that about.
Yeah.
So you're obviously been in the world of cancer for a long time. Tell us why, and then I'd love to get into just a few little ideas on, how should we be thinking about cancer? How should we, as leaders, as human beings, what if anything should we be doing when it comes to being proactive around this subject? Would love all your thoughts and advice there.
Yeah, it's my movement to this organization and to the cancer world has been kind of an interesting one. I think kind of natural progression, if you will. I started out my career in medicine as a family physician, just I did everything. I was one of the old school guys, even though I'm not that old. I don't think I'm that old anyway. But the very early 2000s, so 2003, I had my own practice and I did everything from newborns to inpatient to rounded in the hospital. And it was a great experience. It took care of everyone. One of my first true interactions with someone with cancer was a young man. I still think of him today. He was 32, 33, I believe. They had a terrible appendiceal carcinoma. I remember him coming in. He had 3 young daughters, and beautiful daughters. He came into the clinic and was having abdominal pain. I'm like, oh, you've got pain, you've got appendicitis, or it's what it seems like. So I sent him to get a scan, and I remember the radiologist calling me. You can still hear her voice, and said, "Hey, Kevin, thanks for sending this guy over." And I'm like, "Oh, he's got appendicitis, doesn't he?" She's like, "No, he's got what looks like mucinous adenocarcinoma of the appendix, and it's not good." And I remember that journey with he and his wife and his 3 daughters, and I went to his funeral, and it kind of was that first step that kind of moved me to think that medicine is composed of all these different areas. You've got, of course, mental health, you've got preventive care, and then you've got, chronic illness, and then you've also got this terrible illness of cancer that affects people throughout all spectrum of ages. And I felt like I really wanted to take care of people when they were the most sick. So I moved to just doing hospital medicine. It wasn't just oncology based, but ultimately did start working in the hospital space with Cancer Treatment Centers of America. During that time as well, shortly after that young man was diagnosed, my father was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And then kind of it reframed him. He was an executive. He owned a transportation company, a truck line. Brilliant man, wonderful guy, hard-nosed, Sicilian, but at the same time was very loving father. And the cancer gave him an opportunity to be much more loving and open with us, myself and my brothers. Anyways, I got into working at Cancer Treatment Centers of America. I realized that we weren't the unique care that we offered to people, which was very much patient-centered, and which was about expediting the delivery of oncology from the time of diagnosis to treatment. We were not affecting enough people. We were only looking at it as a disease process in the individual during that treatment time, and felt like that I could help move that organization to affect people in a broader sense, right? And so either made enough noise or created enough conflict or solved enough problems that I was asked to come out to Phoenix and lead the Arizona market into our new era as we just got purchased by City of Hope out of Duarte, California. And I think now we really need to move, and I've been pushing this to even expand to education, to prevention, to early diagnosis and treatment, because the space of oncology is quickly shifting from disease management for a short period of time to a broader spectrum of, hey, we can identify earlier and earlier who may be at risk for certain, particularly for certain cancers, hopefully educate them on making lifestyle changes that will improve or decrease their likelihood of actually developing a malignancy or giving their body the ability to keep things at bay. And then early detection and then treatment. The earlier you can compress that, the more likely you can have an impact on people. And I think we as an organization need to move more toward, education, prevention, and then treatment as well as kind of not an afterthought, but but a tertiary thing rather than something that we react to. We do that in medicine all the time. We react to problems rather than, prevent, identify, and fix. And so that's really, kind of how I got into this, was where people have touched my life in cancer, and it's going to touch every one of us. I mean, honestly, 1 in 4 people get diagnosed with cancer in their lifetime. So, I mean, everybody who's listening to this, I'm sure both you and I have got close people who've been touched, multiple times by it. So,
is that right? It's 1 in 4, huh?
yeah.
Wow. Well, yeah, my father, as you know, passed away about 3 years ago from small cell lung cancer, and I'm still not happy about that. I still am mad, frankly, and on some days, because I feel like I got gypped out of a fuller life with him. And even though we knew for about a year that it was an aggressive form of cancer, and that, he probably had about a year to live. And sure enough, it was almost exactly a year. And I spent a ton of time with him and asked him a million questions, and I wrote his eulogy and gave it to him before he passed. And I felt like I had dotted my I's and crossed my T's, and I was, good to go. And then he passed away, and 2 days later I had 1,000 more questions, and every day it seems like I think of him, a few years later. It's like, it's the worst. And thank God for folks like you guys who are doing this work and trying to push. I love this idea of what'd you say, lifestyle changes and early detection. How do we get further in front of this?
Well, I think that, it's imperative on us as, executives, leaders, superintendents, other people, is to really, I mean, there's so much move right now in what, like, leaders picking up a social justice cause or whatever. Why not focus on the individual and focus on, their wellness, and really be a champion of getting people, to protect their own life in a way, that they would protect others, And so I think it's imperative on us to educate, make available for people, again, a lot of it can be through prevention, in the sense that, we do know that 40% of cancers are induced by lifestyle, choices. So although smoking has declined dramatically, people still smoke a lot. And now they're vaping and doing other things that impact their lungs and inflammation. We know that, there is a push for a lot of people to become more physically fit and not as heavy as they used to be, but still there's a lot of obesity in this country. And that's a big risk factor for all sorts of different cancer diagnoses. And so, if we can help people change that, and then truly embrace those handful of screening tests that we've got available, and if we as leader can make it, a big push to make certain that 100% of our employees, our colleagues that meet the criteria for screening actually get it done on a regular basis, we can really improve outcomes, because the earlier you find this stuff. Small cell is a great example. Lung cancer is, unfortunately, it's often found late, but if you can find these things early, a lot of them are completely curable, if you will, through certain interventions. And so we have to do a better job of that. We have to focus on that as a society as well. So we have many other things to focus on too, though. So.
There's plenty of work to be done, right?
Yeah.
It reminds me of this book I just pulled off the shelf here called The End of Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
By Dr. Breedenson. Have you heard of it?
I've heard of it. I've not read it.
Just really fascinating. About basically, he makes the analogy that, if you've got 36 holes in your roof, then you need to go to work on patching all those, and even if you only patch 30, that's at least some progress. And a lot of it gets back to these lifestyle behavior choices that we have to own as individuals. We have to take ownership over, because if we can start to impact those things, then he's seeing a reduced likelihood for Alzheimer's, later in life. And I would imagine it's the same idea when it comes to cancer. So if you were to give the audience sort of one thing, when it comes to cancer, to be thinking about, is it a lifestyle thing? Is it a test that they should go get earlier in life? What would you say is at the top of that list?
Yeah, I think, first is really understanding their family history for certain things. I mean, it's not a lot. I mean, right now we don't, hate to say this, but we don't know a lot of things right now. Still, there's a lot of information coming. Everyone thinks of family risk as a primary, risk factor for developing cancer, and we only know a handful really of tumors that are definitely associated with genetic defects right now. However, it's amazing. It seems like every month or so, our scientists are identifying, future things that may put individuals at risk for developing certain cancers. I think the first thing that I would tell everyone here as far as reducing their risk would be, number one, don't ever smoke. I mean, it goes without saying, but it still amazes me the number of people who smoke when you go around young people. Don't even do it when you're young. It doesn't make sense. And make sure that you maintain a healthy weight. I mean, and then the third thing, there's no evidence to this. This is just my personal opinion. I think we need to avoid a lot of these processed, foods and artificial sweeteners and flavor enhancers and all that stuff, just because it can't be good. I mean, they just can't be good. It's never a good thing to make things artificial if it exists in nature. So don't expose yourself to that stuff, because we just don't know yet. There are a handful of screening tests that are known to be very beneficial. The United States Task Force of Preventive Services outlines those, and everyone knows them. They're the mammography if you're a woman, breast, it's things like colonoscopies. I mean, colon cancer there is an epidemic of unfortunately aggressive right-sided colon tumors in young men for some reason right now. I mean, just like we've never seen before. In the 30s, didn't exist before. And there's all sorts of theories going around as to why, but there may be some evidence on the ultra processed foods and all these other things. But so colon cancer screening is a must for anyone over 45 years of age. I don't care if you think it's a terrible test and you don't want a colonoscopy, get the stinking thing done, or at least go get one of the blood tests or other things that's available that may lead to a colonoscopy. But your best bet is to find a good gastroenterologist and get your colonoscopy. If you are a smoker and have smoked, I mean, talk to your doctor about lung cancer screening, because it is a study that can improve outcomes dramatically for individuals who meet the criteria for it. And I think the number's abysmal. I think only like 8% of people who are eligible for lung cancer screening are getting it right now. That number may be off. I don't know, maybe even lower in some areas and higher in others, but it is abysmal how few people are getting screened for lung cancer. Again, a stage 1A cancer can be curable through resection, through cutting it out or irradiating it. And so there are some benefits there. I think the future is bright, though. When we look at the genomic markers and the way these scientists today are pulling tumors out and creating vaccines or identification of the body to actually fight the tumor from its own ability is pretty impressive. So I think the future is bright in oncology. It's going to still continue to be a battle because we're an ever-changing organism, but live well and always smile. That's helpful.
Yes. Well, we're just like organizations. Organizations are organisms, and we don't think about it that way. But if you want to have a healthy culture within your team, you have to continuously work at it. It's not a one and done sort of exercise. And I think net what I hear from you is take ownership of your health, be informed, and then take action. Don't wait for your doctor to do it for you. Really take ownership over your own healthy lifestyle.
Absolutely.
Well, let's wrap up with a book recommendation if you've got one for us.
Yeah. I do read quite a bit, but not as much as I should. I think one of the most impactful books on that I've read, and just because it's moving and it kind of makes you think of who you are as a creature, and if it was is a small book by Carol Houselander, The Reed of God. I'm not sure if you've ever read it. It's it may turn some people off because it's very Marian theology in a sense, but it really is a tome, almost poetic writing by Carol Houselander. I think she was around in World War II or something, about you becoming this vessel, like this ability to kind of fill your life with the gifts that are given you, and you know, that if you truly open yourself up in the right way, if you will, and as we talked earlier, kind of be that reed or that opening, you can really change a lot more than just yourself. And so more than anything else, it's a quick read, but it's just a beautiful, if you're into poetry or nice writing and just imagery, it's just really a good time to kind of sit back and reflect and kind of help improve your own soul and just your outlook on things. So that's something I can think of right now.
It sounds like a great one. Sounds like a great one. We could all use a little bit of, I think, filling our souls in this day and age, for sure. A little hope and a little feel good. So, well, fantastic. Well, thank you for the time again, and thank you for again the work that you and your impressive team are doing out there to help folks with cancer. So, thanks again.
Yep, been a great time, Tom. Thanks.